Wow. Thank you for the lovely introduction. Hello, everyone. My name is Kat. You may have noticed in Frank's introduction that I use they, them pronouns. I am non-binary. I know there are people who are speaking multiple languages in this room. I myself am learning Portuguese. I'm based in Lisbon. In Portuguese, I use the neo-pronoun ele, or I use ele pronouns, so the masculine pronoun. So if you're speaking a Romance language, feel free to use the same, or just refer to me by my name. I am the Partnerships and Programs Director at Force of Nature. And this term, mobilizing mindsets for climate action, feels like big and kind of airy and maybe doesn't translate very well. So I am actually going to explain to you what it is that we do. But wow, I'm just like in awe of the people that I get to speak with today and the people who are speaking at this event and the 130 activists that are here who are doing the work in their home countries. And it really struck me this morning, this feeling of like imposter syndrome. You know? And I wonder how many other people here feel like imposters doing this work, or doing any work really, but especially when you look around at the people who are doing this work, right? And something that I think about a lot is that young people are told over and over again that it is our responsibility, and I'm really aging out of the category of young, right? At Force of Nature, we define young people, anyone up to the age of 35, so there's a wide enough bracket. I myself am 28, but I've been doing this work for many, many years. And I always think about how it's young people who are told that they are the stewards for the future, that they are going to find the solutions, that they are going to do the work that is going to undo the decades and decades of exploitation and extraction of people on the planet, these impossible big systems, right? And then they are not invited into boardrooms. They do not get to make decisions about the educational system. And they are not invited into political spaces in a meaningful way. And so that's why Force of Nature exists. I joined Force of Nature after a background all over the place, and lastly in tech, before I realized that for all of the lip service that young people were getting, we weren't really being equipped, we weren't really being funded, we weren't really being platformed, right? It's all well and good to put young people on a stage, but what does it mean to fund their projects? What does it actually mean to make sure that they're getting the resources that they need and that they're really being listened to? And this is where I came into contact with Force of Nature. It does just so happen that Force of Nature was founded out of this need, seeing that young people were feeling eco-anxious. This is relatively new research, right? Like eco-anxiety as a word only really came into popularity in the last 10 years. Clover Hogan, who is the founder of Force of Nature and also happens to be another alumni from the Green School in Bali, which is where I graduated from, realized that there was overwhelmingly this sense of doom in the population of young people, right? 70% of young people feel eco-anxious. Eco-anxiety is defined as general fear, hopelessness, stress about the future of the planet, about the future of people. And at the same time, 56% of young people feel hopeless about the future. It's not like it's not a hopeful statistic, sorry, excuse my reuse of the word, but we know that the climate crisis is already here. Young people are already being asked to take action, and there are still massive swaths of the global population where they have the privilege to be able to take action, may feel that actually there's no use doing so. Incrementalism is a big word, right? But what we mean by this is that there are small steps being taken. We've already seen multiple oil companies this year, Shell and Exxon included, basically quietly go back on all their climate commitments and continue doing what they're doing to destroy the planet. And these stories of hopelessness, I won't talk about oil CEOs because we don't work with those, but within companies that we've worked in as Force of Nature, we've heard the same stories on repeat. These stories of, I'm too small to make a difference, the problem is too big for me to do anything, it won't make profit for our shareholders, but also there's nothing I can do. Who am I to take any action around climate? These are the same stories except for the shareholder one that we hear in classrooms, right? Where young people say, well, this problem is far too overwhelming, what could I possibly do as an individual? And so we came out of this problem as Force of Nature. We said, what actually is the biggest problem? And earlier, we heard that we've already got the solutions, we've already got the tools, we've got the resources to take radical action on climate that gives us a livable and just future, but critically, we lack the motivation, and not we as in the royal we, obviously those in this room, the activists who came out here, people who are already doing work in their communities, but a critical mass of the population still, and critically, people in power who continue with business as usual. So what we realized is we need a revolution in mindset. Now, your mindset is a set of beliefs that are based on your experiences about what's possible in the world. Now, this isn't as simple as like, we all just need to manifest it, right? Like, this is like a lot bigger than that. Mindset actually drives our actions. A mindset might be, I'm too small to make a difference, which leads to inaction, which might lead to hopelessness. Another mindset is, every person counts, which might lead me to take action in a local community group, which will ultimately lead a ripple of change in those around me. We know that we're not going to solve the problem with the same thinking and the same people that created it. So the work that we do at Force of Nature is we run free programs with young people to empower them to understand their eco-anxiety, their difficult climate emotions, and create feelings of agency, empower them to go out and take action, and then we equip them with the skills to do so through a series of online trainings, again, entirely free for young people. And we bring them into conversation with the people who are making decisions about their future. So these are leaders across business, education, and policy who we work with to bring young people into the room and have them not just listen to, but leading in these spaces. Changing your mindset is all about, we believe, starting from understanding your climate feelings, making it human and tangible again. I know that sometimes when I think about the climate crisis as this big global phenomenon, and I want to talk to my family about taking action, it actually more often than not shuts them down. Because when I come at it from a global lens, it's overwhelming, it's distant, it's often too big to really get our heads around. As human beings, we're not built for that kind of scale of understanding, right? But when I hear people's personal stories, or we talk about what's happening in the communities of people who are affected, or we talk about what's happening in our own local communities, and we make the problems tangible again, people are inspired to take action. But they might not see it as climate action, right? And so how important is it that that is the language that we use? So breaking it down, talking about the human impact, talking about climate emotions. I, for one, feel overwhelmed and stressed when I think about the climate crisis. I also feel hope. I also feel hopelessness, right? And we can hold a multitude of emotions as we do this work, and we have to. We introduce new ways of thinking, so this is actually rewriting those stories and beliefs, which will lead to doing things differently, which is the most important part. So we work at this intersection of intergenerational exchange, mobilizing tomorrow's climate leaders, and changing the institutional mindset. There is a question that I've been plagued with recently, which is how much do we change things from the inside versus flip the table entirely? And I think, truthfully, it's a mixture of both. I get a lot of questions as a youth activist about, how do you feel about the protests or about the sit-ins and how do you feel about Just Stop Oil in the UK, right? Is a very sort of in the news direct action group who does things that are kind of controversial. And my answer to that is actually, we need everyone doing everything. Because the time isn't now, it was yesterday or 10 years ago, and the biggest polluters continue to pollute, and the countries who are least responsible for the crisis continue to get the brunt of it, and still, we are not mobilizing at the scale that we need to. So I really do think we need everyone. And the work that we do as Force of Nature, bringing young people into these spaces, we have seen groups of employees in large companies mobilize and begin to do things differently. And sometimes it is insanely stressful and bureaucratic and it feels like it's not fast enough. And other days I have people come to me and say, suddenly we're having conversations about feelings, but we're also having conversations about transformational solutions at work, and things are changing. And even people being hopeful in these settings brings me hope, because it takes people believing that change is possible to make change happen. So this is the pathway of training that we run with young people. Again, all free and online. We have a global community of young people around the world. And it all starts with coming into the community and going through our first training, which is called Becoming a Force of Nature, which is around understanding what skills, talents you already have as a young person, and what your sphere of influence is, right? Who is it around that you can already affect? Following that, this is something we piloted last year. We ran our second pilot this year. Overall, we've had just about 200 young people graduate through this pathway. We had about 1,000 young people start the initial phase, but these specialized skills trainings are things that we developed having started to do the work within companies, speaking on stages like this one, and also working with young people inside of workshop, community, classroom settings, which is our delivering programs training. And so these are 4-week-long specialized skills trainings. And the graduates of these trainings in the last year, so when we piloted it last year, I've seen the graduates of these trainings already go out and get jobs in the field that they wanted to in climate. We've seen people go out and actually speak on stages to global audiences. We've seen people challenge CEOs of major companies in boardroom settings. And I'm continuously astonished at not just how capable, but how direct, skillful, and impactful young people actually are when given the platform to be. The thing about imposter syndrome is that it's not actually through thinking about it that we get over it. It's only through doing the thing that is scary in the first place. And the conversations that I've had with the community members who have been in the community or gone through this training is that the thing that gives them the most confidence to go out and continue challenging, continue doing this work in their own community is the other people around them who believe in them enough to support them to do so. And that, I think, is the crux of community for me, is that it is in the moments when we need someone to tell us that actually we can do it, and actually be scared and do it anyway, and actually here are some resources to help you do the thing you want to do. That's what community is about. And that's really, beyond all the trainings, beyond all the work that we do in companies, that's what I think the community at Force of Nature really has done. And one of the things we realized we had to do was make it local, because actually we've primarily worked online. We, as I mentioned, started in 2019. We grew, according to the timeline, during the pandemic. So all of the work we did was online, which was, on the one hand, great, because it meant that we were able to reach young people in communities all over the world with internet access, and we were able to actually empower local leaders, young people who are local leaders, to begin their own community groups, to make the trainings and the content that we run relevant and accessible to the people in their community. So last year, we trialed something called climate cafes. We had been a part of the COP process before, but we realized that actually there was so much conversation happening outside of the climate summit, official space, that young people needed somewhere to be hopeful, needed somewhere to take action, needed somewhere to have conversations in their own local community. And this is where the Climate Cafes was born out of. It was a toolkit that we released last year, and what we saw was people all over the world stood up and said, I want to run a climate cafe. And in the last year, we've had actually 160 decentralized climate cafes all over the world. These are young people who stepped forward, who accessed the resource, that had conversation prompts, that had guides as to how to set up your own space for gathering. And it happened in over 45 countries around the world. We realized that there was funding needed for this, for young people, and so we mobilized a micro-grant program just around COP last year, COP27, where we crowdfunded and were able to send a micro-grant of about 100 to 200 pounds, which is about the same in euros, to young people who were leading these cafes to make sure that they had access to transportation or food or drink or a space if they needed to rent a space wherever they were. And what we heard were reports of people all over the world who maybe hadn't had a space to talk about even just how overwhelmed they were about the climate crisis. But out of these groups, we've seen a number of continuous groups pop up who otherwise may not have existed. Young people who said, actually, there are solutions that are already happening in our community. Let's meet on a regular basis, or let's start a new project that actually is going to impact the people who we are here with. And we got a number of lovely reports and photos of people who ran these climate cafes with the funded support. And this is really the activation of community in a decentralized way that I think is core to the climate movement. And those of you who are already part of the climate movement, I'm preaching to the choir, right? Like grassroots action, we know is what is necessary. We know is what can happen at scale once we get together in community that actually creates a difference. And for many of the people who joined climate cafes, maybe they didn't know how to access that space, or they didn't know how to come into conversation in community, or they felt afraid to broach the topic because they weren't experts themselves. And so this model as a way of inviting people in that is low barrier to entry, that is led by local young people, is something that we want to continue doing and continue ensuring is funded so that young people who are running this, especially from communities who may face barriers to access, financial, right, like actual environmental, we want to make sure that young people have the resource to gather in community as much as possible. And so this year we are running this initiative again. It is live on our website. You're welcome to check it out, share it with your friends, and we're going to be supporting young people in communities to actually gather again. And we have a global activation day this year on November 30th, which is also the first day of COP28, where we want as many climate cafes as possible to stand up and show political leaders that actually it is the power of community that is going to shift the dial on climate action, and that leaders need to be listening to young people, and not just listening, but centering them, resourcing them, and platforming the work that they do in a tangible way. And so that is it from me. Thank you so much for listening.